It's great to have everybody here. We are having our first Faith 250 Zoom conversation in preparation for this spring and all the work that we're doing around rebuilding American civic health and democracy in this 250th year. We've been doing a lot of different kinds of work, and I'm excited to try this format with an old friend and someone I have great respect for, who knows more about civic health and culture than I will ever know. I certainly have so much fun talking with Rich. So we're going to try and stay on topic, which is hard for us. And we'll go from there. There'll be time for questions a little bit later on. So by all means, put your questions in the chat and we'll get to them. And Manal is going to interrupt us if there's a question that really is timely for the meeting. Just one word of kind of housekeeping and everything. Faith 250 is a real homegrown organization. It's run out of our synagogue here in Reston, Virginia. A friend of mine who works for a national organization says, "Wow, you're really doing this with duct tape and fishing wire." And I'm like, "Yeah, we are." I'm really thrilled to have Rich Harwood from the Harwood Institute and some members of his staff, Tristan Wood and Manal Khanna, who are helping us here today hosting this meeting. It's great to see a lot of friends from around the country joining us for this. And it's great to see a lot of strangers who are joining us. Faith 250 really got off the ground this past August. The official launch was July 4th. And in that time, our Substack has grown to just around 750 subscribers. And we know of 20 plus clusters that have formed of roughly 5 to 10 congregations each cluster. So, we're talking about 150 congregations that have signed up to be a part of Faith 250. And that number is growing. We anticipate as we get closer to July 4th, it'll continue to grow. Okay. That's all housekeeping. Let's jump into this conversation with Rich Harwood, my dear friend. Just full disclosure, Rich and I met because we both used to belong to the same synagogue. And we've been in conversation for about a decade now about his amazing work. The Harwood Institute, in my summary, this is not the official verbiage, but in my summary, they're the people you call when your local community goes sideways, okay? Whatever the reason, whatever the problem, Rich has developed with his team over decades a methodology to help local communities build healthy civic culture. And we're going to talk about what exactly that means. And, I want to just jump in and start with this question. If Rich has written a lot of books, and the terms civic culture, I've learned a lot from him. So I would love for him to explain it to everybody else. What does that mean? And what do you mean by civic health, civic culture, civics in general? I know it's more than 10th grade civics class. So when you're talking about civic culture, what are you talking about?
Well, first, great to be with everyone. Michael, great to be with you. I'm a big fan of Faith 250. So if you're not already a part of it, please do so. Because honestly, we need it in the country, and we need faith leaders and people of faith to step forward in the country, which I know we'll talk more about. As Michael said, I've been doing this work for about 40 years. And in communities and across, our work is spread to all 50 states and 40 countries. And, everyone thinks that the most important things we need to focus on are strategies, programs, and initiatives. And I don't mean to diminish them. They are important, and we work with them. But in the 40 years of doing this work, what I've learned is that the biggest predictor about whether or not communities of any size, it could be a congregation, it could be a neighborhood, it could be a side of town, it could be an entire geographic community. We've worked at the state level and the national level on civic culture also. That the biggest predictor of whether or not communities move forward is not their strategies, initiatives, and programs, but their civic culture. And just a quick example, I was just with 40 funders last week in Sarasota, Florida. And they told me the exact same thing that every community tells me that we work with when I ask them, what are the things that are actually holding your community back? And inevitably, they say, we don't have enough leaders who have the community in their line of sight. We don't have constructive norms that enable people to interact together and work together. We know how to get together. We don't know actually how to work together. We don't have enough organizations that catalyze change in our community and enable us to move forward. We don't have enough informal networks that bring people together, not to take credit for things we didn't do or make ourselves feel important, but to share ideas, to innovate together, to spark things, to spark our imagination. We don't have a habit of discourse in our community that's productive. And too often we're just tearing each other down and tearing each other apart. So I'm ostensibly going through all the different dimensions of civic culture. And what's
Okay.
interesting, last thing I'll say about this, Mike, what's interesting about this, particularly when I was working with funders last week who are interested in giving out grants, that's how they measured their effectiveness. I said to them, well, to create the civic culture that you just named, all the things I just talked about that were too fragmented, were too siloed, were working apart from one another. I said, how much money does it actually cost? And it doesn't cost anything. What it requires is for us to be focused. What it requires is for us to have our community in our line of sight. What it requires is that no matter what strategy, program, or initiative that you're doing, that we are intentional in how we design and implement things so that we're always strengthening the civic culture of our communities. Last thing, I'm from New York, so I'm going to say last thing multiple times. It means I usually have two or three more points.
I usually say, as I finish wrapping up my
As
opening.
I finish wrapping up, there you go, from a rabbi. So as I finish wrapping up, um, we can spend all the money we want on all the programs we want. And that might be important in some areas. But the conclusion, the thing that I've learned, I didn't start with this, but what I've learned over these 40 years is if we don't pay attention to our civic culture, if we don't strengthen our civic culture, we're not going anywhere, particularly nowadays. It's the number one thing I think that's holding us back.
Well, I can say from working in a congregation my whole life, when we don't have a good civic culture inside the congregation, it's brutal. It's exhausting. It's demoralizing for me personally, and I think for my colleagues out in the field. Um, I'm speaking at the congregation level, which means it's one institution in one location with a captive audience of people, mostly captive. People come and go, but I'm wondering, there's a huge range of levels between congregation and the big problems we're facing as an American democracy, like a gigantic number of those levels. And I'm wondering, what's your sweet spot? Like, what is your favorite level of society that you like to work with, and not just personally what you like to work with, but where you see the most opportunity for progress in building civic culture? Where does it happen? Neighborhood, city, county, state? Like what is the place where you find the sweet spot?
Yeah, I think where I find the sweet spot is when people can be realistic and honest with themselves about where their sphere of influence is. So for some of you, that might be in your congregation. For some of you, that might be the neighborhood around your church or synagogue or mosque. For others of you, it might be your entire community. For others of you, it might be a region. Um, for me, what's most important is that no matter that your contribution, the size of your contribution doesn't matter. What matters is that we're contributing to the health of our civic culture. And so what I would say, Michael, is figure out your sphere of influence and begin there. And what's important about this work, I have this book that I published not too long ago called the Little Field Guide for Community-Led Change. And the last part of it is, the last chapter is named Time is Our Ally.
Hmm.
And we always think that time is our enemy in this work. And I actually think time is our ally because if you start in your sphere of influence and you can demonstrate proof that you're moving forward, that you can bring people together and start to generate something together, then the name of the game becomes how do we create momentum so that it can take off, it can take root, it can grow, and it can spread over time. And when we try to do things that are too big, too fast, they fizzle out and fade away, as we all know. And so what I would say is figure out where your sphere of influence is and start there. And that's going to be good enough to get going.
And
That's
well, I remember once we were talking and you were describing the power of the ripple effect.
yeah.
And the way in which, you start making progress in one place, one small project, one small action, and you figure out a way that it begins to ripple outward to the people around your sphere of influence. And if you could just like share a story about where you've seen that, like what that looks like.
Yeah. You know, Pastor Steve from Reading is on this call. Steve, I won't call on you, but um, you know, we were doing in Reading, Pennsylvania, which I don't know, a little bit more than 10 years ago, was declared the poorest community in America. It was once predominantly all white. It's now 70% Latino. Their civic culture was pretty weak when we first began the work. It's now much stronger. But one of the issues that came up in the community was English as a second language. And Reading had resources around that. They had programs, but they weren't necessarily aligned to what people needed, and they weren't marshaling the collective resources of the community. So one of their first actions was Pastor Steve, who's on this call. Uh, we it was determined in Reading that people weren't going to English as a second language programs in part because they didn't feel safe coming out of their homes, in part because they didn't have enough trust in the people delivering them, in part because any of us who learn a new language are always reluctant and conscious of practicing it with others we don't know and speaking it. And so Pastor Steve came up with the idea, look, lots of folks, particularly in the Latino community, are faith are people of faith. They'll feel comfortable in our church. In our church, we can hold a dinner where we can form practice sessions where people can come around a meal, practice Spanish. People who don't speak Spanish can learn Spanish. So there's a reciprocity at work here. That was one small action. Then Pastor Steve started to hear from other churches who raised their hand and said, can we do this? So Pastor Steve started to teach them to do it. Then civic organizations asked, well, we could do this. Then it ended up spreading to employers. In the meantime, the school district once had a moribund tutor program with high school kids that they had always wanted to revitalize. And so that became revitalized through this because now there was a meaningful way to plug people into actually tutoring folks and helping them to learn English. The Reading Area Community College began to create instructors again. And on this went. But it started in part with this one dinner in a local church where the intent wasn't necessarily to spread it, but it catalyzed and unleashed a chain reaction of actions that we never could have predicted. It created strange bedfellows we never thought might have come together. And by the way, it had the Literacy Council, who you would think would have been turf conscious and resisted this effort, was one of the first folks at the table. A guy named Ryan's the head of that, and he's one of the best leaders I've seen. And that then helped to recreate the Literacy Coalition, which failed during COVID and is now up and running again. So all of these things happened by starting small, by getting things in motion, and then by unleashing this chain reaction. And I've
So,
seen this, Michael, in hundreds of communities all across the US and other countries.
so I mean, I'm the Faith 250 kind of theory of change is that these kinds of local relationships, informal relationships exist all over the place between clergy and houses of worship, and that the thing that maybe we could work on together is ways of talking about America and talking about what we want America to be and being aspirational about America. Um, so this is not like I'm very friendly with people from other organizations that are focused on like red blue dialogue. This is not that. This is more aspirational talking about America. I have all kinds of respect for red blue dialogue. It's great, but um, I want to test our theory of change with you in two parts. One is how often do you run into healthy networks of clergy and congregations that have these informal connections between each other? I am incredibly fortunate in our area of Northern Virginia. We just have this great network of clergy. A lot of that is due to the influence of Pastor Stephen Smith Cobbs, who I think is on this call, and over decades of time, right? Decades of just the holy mundane work of sending out emails on a regular basis and getting us together, right? And I'm wondering how often you run into that kind of healthy clergy congregation network around the country.
Not enough.
And have you ever succeeded in catalyzing it in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think so. It clearly exists. Sometimes when it exists, it's really healthy in the way that you just described. Sometimes it exists in terms of people getting together, but not really working together
Mm.
because people are fearful of having hard conversations. Sometimes people get together for interfaith discussions, which almost, if one's not careful, becomes a negotiation over doctrine and beliefs and texts. But here's the thing, and then in many cases, in a lot of the communities where we're working, what we find is that, not all, but most, we find that there are some faith leaders and people of faith who want to work together, but that faith has come to divide their communities even more. I remember sitting with a group of 20 or 30 clergy in Clark County, Kentucky, where we had just done some work about the community. And I had to say to the clergy behind the closed door, I'm sorry to tell you, you are part of the problem.
Mm.
Because you're competing over putting people in seats on Wednesday night and Sunday morning or Friday night and Saturday morning, whenever it may be, that through those competitive forces, through your arguments about doctrine and belief, we have made the community more divisive, not less divisive. So, so that's something I think we all need to examine. In Alamance County, North Carolina, where we have a faith team, we have faith teams in a lot of the communities where we're working. So many of the clergy told us, we want to work together, but our congregants, we're fearful of our congregants and what they would say. So here's what I found the trick is, if I can mention this.
Yeah.
What I found the trick is that, look, when I start working with in Rockingham County, where we just launched a new initiative, and I met with faith leaders. I said, look, I'm not here to argue over your doctrine and beliefs. We're not here to change each other. But what we can do, while we respect one another's doctrines and beliefs, or at least allow one to adhere to them, we can figure out how we can work with civic purpose. We can figure out what really matters to people in our community. We can really decide that we want to strengthen the civic culture of our community because that benefits everyone and it also benefits our individual congregations, right? It comes back to us. And so if we can say that we will allow each other to pursue different doctrines and beliefs, and at the same time find things that we can work on that have a shared civic purpose, that's what I find unlocks the ability of faith leaders in particular to come together and work together.
And when that happens, have you seen faith leaders make a big difference in
Oh
the
God.
progress?
In Clark County, Kentucky, the local Y, just a quick story, the local Y closed. 400 kids had no place to play ball. This was a town that was divided by race, geography, income, faith, and had a methanol crisis and fentanyl crisis, right? So pretty much everything that could go wrong had been going wrong,
Right. Yeah, sounds grim.
right? And the faith community had a ministerial councils, but people weren't really showing up. And as I mentioned, they were highly competitive, highly divisive. So of the 20 or 30 folks that I talked with behind closed doors, 4 of them came to our Public Innovators Lab. And out of that, one of them stepped forward and said, well, I have a gym. I can actually allow kids to play ball. And then another one stepped forward, and then another. Finally, 4 of them stepped forward and said, well, if we come together, we can start a new league for these kids. Now, that's not novel. Here's what is novel. When it's about their civic culture, when they came together, they didn't just schedule time for kids to go play ball in their local churches. I did that as a kid myself at St. Clement's down the street from where I grew up, who I actually played for um, during school.
You must
But
have been good because my own faith would not allow me to play ball for us. So whatever. It's good.
yeah, they always asked me to stand next to Mother Mary in the team photos.
Yeah, I was told by a basketball coach once to stay out of the key.
Yeah.
Just stay out of the key. Yeah.
So, but here's what they did. They decided they had 4 or 5 churches to start with, and they decided that they would structure this league in such a way that kids would play ball in neighborhoods that are different than their own. that they would bring parents together, not to coach their own kids, but to work with kids who they didn't know. That they would mix black and white kids and poor and wealthier kids together intentionally to ensure that they were mixing the community.
Wow.
That they
So
encouraged.
I just want to share a story from our last Thursday. We had our first Faith 250 fellowship night for our cluster. Okay. So we have 9 congregations in our group. We had our first gathering of the congregational members. We had 170 people show up, and we intentionally split them up, one person per one institution, at each table, right? So there was 9 seats, and we made sure we had one person per institution at each table. And people walked in the door, and they were initially, and so in the comments, we got these comments. People were scared when they walked
Yeah,
in the door. And by the end, some of the comments were like, I was so grateful for the opportunity to be forced into that situation, meeting strangers and having these deep conversations with strangers. So the second part of our theory of change, I want to test this with you. You were talking about the power of a civic project or a civic purpose, as a unifying and cross-cutting, means of building civic culture. What do you think about the American future and aspiration for what it means to be American, and the narrative around this? Does the 250th in your mind hold the possibility of uniting people around building civic culture? Because this moment is a once or twice, once in every 2 generations moment. What are your thoughts about that?
yeah, absolutely. I do. I think in fact people are yearning, not all people, but the vast majority of people I encounter across the country, no matter who they voted for in the last presidential race or what political team they belong to, everyone believes the country is off course. Everyone has lost faith in our institutions and often in one another. Everyone believes that we can do better and be better as individuals in our communities and as a country. Everyone believes that I encounter to varying degrees that we need to reckon with our history and also recognize the strengths of this country, the good things of this country.
So, like in 2021, you wrote this book, thin book, a civic virus, and it was more of a monograph, and based on data that you guys had collected. And what I remember from that was not so much the issue of division, but the issue of despair. Um, and you just listed off a bunch of things that provide me hope, not despair, right? People are so like, how does that despair turn? How do you turn that despair about America into the hope to address our history, to talk to other people, to like, what's the process here?
Well, first, I'd say that we have to reframe our discussions. If we insist on bringing people together simply to talk about problems or to bitch and complain or to lay claim to things, then we'll end up in a toxic cul-de-sac where people are just pointing fingers at one another. So we try to stay away from that in our work. If we can reframe discussions about what matters to us, and if we stay away from politics in the sense of just asking people to articulate their political positions on an issue, that's a non-starter. It's a kiss of death in this work. If, on the other hand, we focus on what I would call what matters to people in their daily lives and their aspirations for their lives and their community, what I can tell you is in the places that are riddled with some of the biggest culture wars in the country that we've worked in, that unlocks the discussion. It gives people a sense of safety. It connects people to one another because they start to realize while we don't agree on everything, there are some things we can agree on. It creates a common shared language that we can work with. And it points us in a direction of things that we can believe in and work on together. And in doing that, it implicates all of us because we can't achieve these things on our own. We need each other.
Mm.
And people intuitively know we're meant to go together. All human beings know that. And we as Americans know that. And so it's by tapping into those things, that we can reframe the discussion, open things up, make it safe for people to talk about things, even when they disagree, or especially when they disagree. And do this, I'm going to echo something I said earlier. What I would urge you to do is always start small and grow things as opposed to starting too big and having them fizzle out, which will just affirm to people that we can't get our act together. we can't move forward together, and we make promises we can't deliver on.
So for you, what is the civic project of this 250th moment for America? Like for you personally, what is it you're wanting July 4th to communicate?
I want us to think about uh, our history and what has worked, and to be honest about what has not. There are a lot of stains on our civic fabric, starting from before the founding of this nation. So we need a reckoning with that in a productive way. Then I think I'd like to see us pivot to who is it we seek to be today, and who is it we seek to be moving forward? And what are the ways in which we can just begin to take those steps together? Look, I think that we face a crisis of belief in the country. We don't believe in ourselves. We don't believe in our institutions. We often don't believe in one another. And the question is, what engenders belief? And what engenders belief is not that we're going to solve everything. It's that people feel seen and heard, that their dignity is upheld, that they're validated and accepted, that they believe there's a pathway for us to begin to take action together with some civic purpose. And I think the 250th can get us laser focused on this and enable us to make down payments and moving forward as a country.
So in Hebrew, belief is the same word as, amen is the same word as reliability, emunah, right? Is when you believe in something, it means you think it's reliable. So you say amen, right? And when it comes to the story of our history and retelling our history and evaluating our history and then creating something new going forward, I find that that work requires a huge amount of vulnerability, a huge amount of trust that the other person is going to not mock me for the mistakes when I talk about American history, or when I talk about let's say I'm talking to my African American colleagues and I'm clearly white and I totally mess up and make a mistake. I have to trust I'm not going to be mocked for that mistake. And that's just one tiny little example of the vulnerability involved in speaking aspirationally about America. And I'm wondering, what are the things that you do because you're not a clergyman, although I will say I have seen you in front of groups of people and you could be one, and very effectively. And I'm wondering, what are the things that you do to help people with that vulnerability anxiety so that they feel like they're with people who they can believe in, who have their back while they're addressing some of these some of the harder stuff.
Two concrete things you could do immediately, both of which I just did in the last week. Um, so imagine I'm bringing together a group of funders who think they have the answers to every problem in the world, and they have the resources to fund it. It's a tough group to work with. So I started with them with an exercise I do with a lot of people, which is, what diminishes belief for you today? And that's one list. And what engenders belief or helps create belief for you today?
Hmm.
And when people create those lists together, not individually, but together in small groups, and they can come together and talk about it, it immediately, Michael, levels the playing field, because we share so many of the same things about what diminishes belief. And we share so many of the same things about what creates belief or engenders belief. And when we do that, we immediately see each other as fellow human beings, not as political titans, not as political enemies, not as someone trying to get a one up on you, but just as human beings who are in search of something that is uniquely human, belief. And so that's one thing. And you can build from there. The second thing I'd say, I just go back to what I was saying before, which is how we start the conversation. I would not start the conversation by saying, let's do a review of our history together.
Okay.
That's going to create problems. I would start the conversation about what are our aspirations for our lives and our communities. Let's start there.
So this is a great jumping off point to my last question, which is that we're starting the conversation off with the text. We're starting the conversation off by saying, okay, here's a document that we know is important to America. Maybe it's not important to you personally, but we know it's got a very robust place in American history and American life. And some of the documents are really, really well known, like the Declaration of Independence. Some of them are a little bit less well known, like What to the Slave is the Fourth of July, although still pretty famous. This practice comes out of many years in my congregation and other congregations around the country. And we've done this with about 60 or 70 documents in our congregations. But for Faith 250, we just have four, right? And I'm wondering if you feel like that starting place with the document and what do these words what do these words mean to you when you hear the words tempest tossed in the New Colossus, right? Or give me your tired, you're poor. Like, how do these words hit you, and what do they mean about America for you? Give me a sense of what you think about this methodology and any suggestions you think about how to improve upon it.
You're asking me to critique it here.
Yeah. Open critique. Look, this is the reason why I feel confident doing this is because the problem of American civic culture and faith in America and belief in our democracy is like everyone agrees on it. It crosses all the partisan lines. And there's also, and everybody I've talked to about this, there's not a great sense of everyone who knows what to do. Like there's a great sense of
No one
people.
knows what to do.
Yeah, and so I'm happy to throw spaghetti against the wall. I am incredibly blessed because I have a congregation that supports me in throwing pasta and seeing what sticks. And so I'm asking open critique, like this idea of starting with American text and asking what does it mean for your soul and for America? What do you think?
I think, first of all, you've tested this, right? So I'm in the business in part of innovation. So for me, everything is what works. What doesn't work? How do we need to change it in order to make it work better? So you've gone through a lot of that process already. Here's, a tip I would probably say,
Please.
which
Because Rich, I've tested this with the clergy friends I've been developing for years and years, and there's
yeah,
people on this call and people out there in the world who are starting this without that benefit, right? So please give the tips.
I think the tip would be that, and you just said this, so I'm just going to lift up something you said. Some people will want to get into a semantic argument about different words. And really, I would imagine the purpose of this is to provide an opening for people to bounce off these texts as a way to examine, like, what do you really believe? What do you really think? What are you really feeling about things? There's a saying in my work, I don't know what I think until I hear someone else speak.
Mm.
So, what do you make of sort of what other people are saying? How does that sit with you? What does it make you think about, right? So all of those questions that continually open things up as opposed to close them down. The trick of this is how do you use these texts to open people up as opposed to have them take positions? That's the whole trick here. And I mean, it's part of it. And that requires someone just helping people in terms of finding their way and having this conversation. I think the good news is most people I would imagine who are going to engage in these conversations want to have them. They may not know how, but they want to have them.
Certainly the people showing up are the ones who are most eager to are hungry for
Right.
these hopeful conversations about America, for
Right.
sure. Which brings me to a question that I said.
One other quick thing though,
Oh,
but that goes back to something we talked about earlier. I don't want this to turn into a training thing, but that goes back to what we said earlier, which is start with the willing and then keep expanding. Don't bring in the hardest people at first. You want to find your sea legs. You want to see how people react to this stuff. You want people through word of mouth to say, "Oh, I want to go talk." Our work in communities spreads like a positive contagion. Why? Not because we're pushing it, but because people who have experiences and realize that there's a different path forward go and tell other people about it. And by that, it begins to spread like a positive contagion. That's the effect I would imagine you want to create here.
okay. You jumped. You answered my question before I asked it. Yeah, that is precisely the effect. So I hear from especially from funders. The question, well, what about the hardest case? Like, what about the really, the person who you disagrees with you the most? How come, what are you doing for them? And how are you connecting with the I'm not going to use labels, but the person who's the most anti-democratic right now, or something like that. And I always struggle with that question because
Don't.
um, when I was at your summit, I don't know, it was in Philly a bunch of years ago, and someone asked me this question, and I said, I was an intern at Cape Florida State Park in Key Biscayne in college. I was an environmental science intern, and I was assigned a job of removing exotic plants. And so I did what any 19-year-old boy would do. I got a machete and a chainsaw and a lot of poison, and I went to the thickest, deepest, like worst, baddest area of exotic plants and cut them all down. And I felt really good about myself and poisoned everything. And then I came back 2 weeks later, and there was like 5 plants for every one that I had cut down. And I learned that you don't start with the hardest part of the park. You start with the edge where there's mixing, where people are already mixed with it, well, not the people, but the plants, and you take out one at a time and you slowly rebuild the native habitat. And I've learned over time, like that's how you spread ideas. Like you start with people who are already in contact with each other and let the ideas spread themselves. I'm hoping Faith 250 can be that for the communities that do it. And I'm hoping that it helps build allies in their local community by word of mouth. So with that, I want to look at the chat. Manal, is there any questions that there's one question right here. Great. Okay. So Tony is asking us, is there a playbook we can follow to do this work? I don't want to try and reinvent the wheel. I could use a step-by-step guide or coaching. I'm sure that you have like volumes of guides for this, Rich. Can you summarize maybe some tips for Tony here?
Yeah, two things. One is I'd be remiss if I didn't say, my team would kill me if I didn't say, one is we have a lot of materials on our website at theharwoodinstitute.org. Almost all of them are free. There are videos. There's some easy to use or easy to start with tools. So that's one thing. Second, we have a school where we teach people this. It's both in person and virtual, and this you can learn how to do this. So that's a second thing. Third, I would say, I just want to leave with the 4 mantras that we use that if you can keep in mind will at least allow you to get started. If I can just mention them
Yeah,
quickly.
please go ahead.
And we have posters of these, which you can get from us also. And there are videos on these. 4 mantras. Turn outward. We have to make a choice. About which direction we're facing. Are we facing inward towards, in this case, our congregations, our congregants, or are we facing outward towards the larger community? It's an orientation, a posture, a disposition. It's a fundamental choice we each have to make. It sounds easy, but so many things in society are telling us to be inward looking, including our congregants,
Yes.
right?
And for clergy, I would say it's important to have this conversation like with the board. If if
Yeah.
if you're going to do the work of civic health building, you've got to have the president and the personnel chair on your team so that they understand this is part of the health of the congregation as part of the larger health of the larger community. But yeah, okay, go ahead. Turn
That's
out.
number one.
Okay.
So turn outward. Second, get in motion.
Mm,
Please don't do endless planning. Good things happen when we're in motion. All the things that happened in Reading was because people were in motion, and the unexpected happens. Unexpected partnerships and allies emerge. Unexpected results become apparent and take form. And so the best thing you can do is plan enough so you can take the first couple of steps and then keep recalibrating as you're going. Don't try to create an 18-month plan. It's not going to work. After 3 months, you're going to have to change it anyway. So just know you're going to do the first few steps. Third, start small to go big. I want large systemic change in our society. I think too many people are getting left out and left behind. I'm sure we agree on that. But too many large comprehensive efforts have failed or fizzled. They haven't delivered on their promises. And too many Americans are frustrated and skeptical and indeed cynical about what's going on in this country. That's been the case for a long time. It's more acute today. So start your efforts small. I mentioned this crisis of belief. Part of it is people need proof today that something positive can happen, that we can actually come together and do these things, then we need to send signals to people that it happens so more people will join us. So start small, have the aspiration to go big. I'm dogged about the aspiration. But what I've learned is it always starts by starting small. That's no different than the American Revolution, the abolition movement, women's suffrage, or any other part of American history. Fourth, think about creating a new trajectory of hope. A new trajectory of hope.
Say more about that. Say more about that.
As I mentioned, we start things with great fanfare and then they fizzle out. So you have a downward sloping curve, right? Starts high, fizzles out. We need to imagine our work or conceptualize our work and do our work in a way that starts small and has an ever expanding sense of civic confidence, ever expanding number of people who are engaging, ever expanding sense of momentum. And all of this only occurs over time. This is why time is our friend. It can only be achieved over time, right? Because as part of this trajectory, you have to demonstrate proof. Whereas Michael was talking about the Hebrew meaning of belief. So you've got to demonstrate something. And so if you can conceptualize and do your work in a way that you're trying to create this upward trajectory, A, it liberates you from having to do everything all at once. You've got to release yourself from that burden and give
It's
yourself.
hard. It's hard because it does feel like the country is falling apart in real time, and it feels like you got to solve it now.
It was before the revolution. It was during slavery. It was when women didn't have the right to vote. It was when we didn't have child welfare laws. It was when we didn't have rights for gays and lesbians and others. This is the history of this country. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step, 2 steps back. We have to persevere and maintain in the struggle. The struggle is about how we build, brick by brick, neighborhood by neighborhood, community by community, over time. And so long as we insist on creating, like your funders do, my funders do, this big bang approach to change, which seldom works.
I'm not criticizing any funders here. Okay, if there's any funders on the call, you're more than welcome to approach us.
I'm not criticizing funders. I'm inviting them to have a different conversation, because we all want to create impact and make a difference in people's lives.
Right. No, I get it. I get it.
Right?
Yeah. So I am thrilled to hear that you want us to start small. That's what Faith 250 is definitely doing. We are starting right there at the local congregational relationship network. We have clusters with 2 congregations in them, and we have some congregations doing this work with these 4 documents on their own, no partners. So I want to go to Christine's question is about existing interfaith organizations. I'm sure you encounter existing interfaith organizations. How do you get them to embrace hope as part of their mandate, building civic hope? Because I've seen it. Look, I was with you in a part of the country I'm not going to name, and a person showed up who's like the professional from the existing interfaith organization, and I could tell it wasn't the best person for your work. So yeah. Do you have
he was sitting directly to my right in that conversation.
Yes, yeah, he was. Yeah.
So what I would say is, I wouldn't talk about doctrine. I wouldn't talk about your individual religious texts, because you know where that's going. What I would do from the get-go is to ask people about what are their aspirations for their community.
Right. That's what you started with. Yeah.
Right. And in doing that, and to acknowledge up front, we're not here to argue over doctrine. We're not here to, I think one of the big mistakes we keep making in America is we keep asking people to give up their beliefs in exchange as an entry fee for joining in doing something civically. And I've seen
start with aspirations is what I'm hearing.
Start with aspirations and build from there.
Okay, Alex, your hand has been up. You've been patient. Let's hear what you have to say.
Yeah, no, I'm thrilled to be here today and really appreciating this conversation. I was recently exposed to Faith 250 at an event in Fort Myers that Rabbi Nicole Luna spoke at, evaluating the Declaration of Independence. And I was in the midst of standing up an alliance for Braver Angels here in Southwest Florida, and I was struck by how similar our missions were. Mm-hmm. And we've subsequently brought Rabbi Luna into our board, and we're partnering with the Lee County Interfaith congregations and Faith 250, which has been really exciting. The biggest challenge I see, and you've already alluded to it, Rich, is that the people that we really feel we need to engage with are the ones that have fallen victim to the division entrepreneurs and frankly don't want to talk to us and feel that there's no reason to talk to the people they disagree with. And I appreciate your comments that you can't push, you need to find a way to lead them to you. But I'd really love if you could provide any further insights or ideas, because I feel some urgency around engaging with those people that don't believe there's a need for us to unite, when I think right now that's the most important thing we can do. And frankly, struggling to make that happen.
Yeah, I think everyone's struggling, Alex, with that. One is I'm really glad that you're combining those two efforts. It sounds like a great idea. So I'm going to say some things you already know, I'm sure, that all of you know. Most of us don't have the relationships and credibility to go into communities that are different than ourselves. Many of us psychologically aren't prepared to do that work. We may want to do it, but when push comes to shove, we go back to the people we already know, or who look like us or sound like us or live on the same side of town as us. So I think one of the keys in this work is that, I keep coming back to civic culture, is that by forming relationships with other groups in the community who are embedded in communities in different ways than we are, A, we're building the relationships and networks we need. And B, they're going to have the credibility that we don't have to bring people together. So that's one thing. Second, that when there's sharp divisions in communities, which is a lot of the communities we work in, a lot of people don't want to get together with people they perceive to be different than themselves. At least initially they don't. And so one of the things that sometimes we have to do is start with people in their own areas, with like-minded folks, so that they can build their civic confidence that they can actually have this conversation. And then we do it someplace else. And then eventually we combine these groups over time. So again, time becomes an important thing here. The third thing I would say is we have a tool on our website you can download for this. It's rooted in religious rituals and other rituals, which is we find that the good work that most people are doing in communities is invisible, not only to the community, but to the people doing the work, because we're so busy doing the work. And we don't actually lift up and tell stories about the work. And I think the stories have to be what I would call civic parables, much like the Good Samaritan story. And so we have a tool that is not about how do I hype my story and sort of shine a light on it, but how do I discover what I am building with others, the good, the bad, and the ugly of it, and begin to tell stories about that work while it's in progress, which signals to other people that something is happening, that allows more people to raise their hand and say, I want to join. So that would be a third thing I think is really important. But again, Alex, as you know, time is really as much urgency as we all have. All this stuff is going to take time, particularly today.
Yeah, I want to. I'm thrilled that you brought up rootedness and talking with people who are rooted deeply in the community, because one of the advantages that houses of worship have is longevity in a community. Like, putting down actual real estate and buildings does send a message. I'm not some Johnny come lately, right? So that's an advantage that we have. I also like the fact that what you're saying is you have different groups that are often like-minded, and you bring them together and they experience each other after already feeling a sense of civic confidence. I just witnessed this in our gathering last week. We had one congregation showed up that was definitely, I would say, politically outliers from the majority of the other congregations. We have 9 congregations, but one of them was pretty much homogeneously different than the other 8. The sense of confidence, civic confidence, that those members of that community had, and the kindness that they showed and respect to everybody else, they were definitely holding positions about, we were reading the new Colossus, we're talking about immigration last week, given what's happening in the world about immigration. And the sense of dignity that they brought to the conversation, even though they disagreed with the policy stuff, they just transformed the whole group. And other people who were anxious to bring their points of view in a diverse environment found confidence by experiencing someone different that disagreed and had that same confidence. So I'm really thrilled. Okay, David, you're probably gonna have the last comment today. So by all means, let's hear what you have to say.
Thank you. During this whole conversation, and I'm brand new to this, I have thought of a number of things. In order to involve, I'm a member of the Baha'i faith, so we kind of include beliefs of all religions. And the best beginning place to create community, in my experience and belief, is in our neighborhoods. You go to your next door neighbors and you talk to them and you get together, and eventually you're having community picnics where people come together. And particularly in small cities, this is recognized, and it can be taken to the authorities like city councils, who can help form larger things to include the entire community. We have found great success in my community, which is Fort Collins, Colorado. I've lived all over the world, and every place that I have lived, there are, for the most part, the populations are like-minded. People want to understand and be united with the rest of their community. When I lived in Kenya, we would work with the largest slum in Nairobi, and the communities would come out and join other neighborhoods and ask them to join. And larger organizations with the foundation of, let's find things that we can agree on and work toward, would happen. This also happened in Beirut. And it's incredibly amazing, the energy that exists in other neighborhoods. It was mentioned, there are neighborhoods of different cultures, and I'm sure there are in DC and New York, even though I don't have experience with them. But if community leaders within these neighborhoods would agree to go into other neighborhoods, that there is, I guarantee that there is the same feeling that we need to solve this. And it's much easier for groups of people from neighborhoods go into other neighborhoods than individuals.
Yeah, David, I appreciate you saying that, especially this week, given the snow that we've had up here, because I know for me, whenever we get a heavy snow, which is not that often in Northern Virginia, I meet my neighbors. It's like we are all behind our closed doors, and then we're out there shoveling for hours together and, exchanging tips on how to break up the ice. And we do meet our neighbors. It's sad that we don't do it more often, but I'm curious, Rich, in your work, have you been at the neighborhood level in a way that sustains the work and builds out this civic faith and civic culture that you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in Flint, Michigan, where we worked, much of our work started in different neighborhoods in the east side, over on the west side. On the west side, it was started by a local church, in fact, a minister, right after 9/11. And so, absolutely, I think there are. Again, what I would say is, depending on the community you're working in and where you're working, the starting point varies, and you just have to figure out what makes sense given where you are. And I can't overemphasize that. There's no immediate recipe. There's no immediate, like, this is the very first place you have to start. I think you want to start where you think you have relationships, where you think you can get things moving, where there's folks who are ready to roll, where you think you can grow things and just get emotion. That's probably the most important thing.
Okay, so I didn't warn you, but I'm gonna close with a question for you, Rich, and that is, there's 4 documents in our Faith 250 program: the New Colossus, the Declaration of Independence, What to the Slave is the 4th of July, and America the Beautiful, and all 4 verses of America the Beautiful. And I'm curious, if you had to pick one of those, one line, one sentence, one phrase from one of those documents that gives you hope, what would it be and why? What's a phrase from any of those documents that gives you hope for America and why?
we the people.
Mm.
I think if you just spent time talking about those three words, um, two of the words, what does we mean in a society that is overrun by consumerism, where people feel hunkered down, where people are in a mode of fight or flight? What does we mean anymore? And then people, we are so focused on, rightly sometimes, on institutions and money and other things, but what does it mean to be, for us to see ourselves as people? And I think that invites conversations about that. That doesn't mean that we are uniform, that there's a uniformity about us, but or a sameness about us. I think it probably invites a conversation about what does it mean for people to be different and still be part of something larger than themselves. And so I think, so for me, I think I would probably start there.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Well, that's it. We're going to be having future Zoom conversations, hopefully one a month, maybe a little more often, have a couple of ideas coming up. Some of them are going to be like this one, focused on methodology and big ideas like civic culture. And some of them are going to be about particular groups of Americans and different groups in America that have different relationships to the 250th. We're lining up a conversation with Native Americans, and how are they looking at the 250th? And I'm hoping down the road to engage with the LDS Church, because I think the LDS Church has a really fascinating history of America and relationship with America and current leadership in America. So I think there's a lot of conversations we're going to be talking about ritual as we get closer. We really appreciate everyone who's joined. Stay tuned for more. And Rich, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. And good to see everyone.
Yeah, good to see everyone. Thank you all.